The 9,586th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. At the outset of the meeting, I should like, at the request of the delegation of the Russian Federation and on behalf of the members of the Security Council, to ask that all those present now stand and join in observing a minute of silence to present its condolences and sympathy to the government and people of Russia, and in the memory of victims of the heinous and cowardly terrorist attack at the concert hall in Moscow region, the Russian Federation, on 22nd of March. I now invite you to stand and observe a minute of silence. I thank you. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Israel and Yemen to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. I propose that the Council invite the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine to the United Nations to participate in the meeting in accordance with the provisional rules of procedure and previous practice in this regard. There be no objection. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Members of the Council have before them document S/2024/254, the text of a draft resolution submitted by Algeria, Ecuador, Guyana, Japan, Malta, Mozambique, Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, Slovenia, and Switzerland. The Council is ready to proceed to the Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements before the vote. I give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Mr. President, I have the honor to introduce this draft resolution on behalf of the 10 elected members of the Security Council, namely Algeria, Ecuador, Guyana, Japan, Malta, Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, Slovenia, Switzerland, and my own country, Mozambique. We wish to commend the Presidency of Japan for convening this meeting in order to take action on this important resolution on the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. We express our deep appreciation to all members of this Council for their efforts and inputs on this draft resolution aimed at ending the catastrophic situation in the Gaza Strip. Mr. President, the situation in Gaza is a matter of grave concern to the entire international community. Indeed, the escalation of the conflict in the Gaza Strip and its catastrophic consequences are a clear threat to international peace and security. In this context, the E10 felt compelled to table this draft resolution before you. The 15 members of this Council, individually and collectively, have a mandate under the Charter to work for the maintenance of international peace and security, and their actions impact the entire international community. This is the strong conviction that led to the drafting of the text that we are considering this morning. This Council has been consistently unanimous in its agreement on the obligation of the parties in conflict to respect international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law. The E10 have always supported the call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza as a fundamental step. For this reason, and in respect for the holy month of Ramadan, we have proposed the present resolution that demands an immediate ceasefire during this sacred period, leading to a permanent and sustainable ceasefire. At the same time, the draft resolution demands the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages and emphasizes that humanitarian access must be allowed to address their medical and other humanitarian needs. These have been among our key demands for weeks. The draft resolution further demands that the parties comply with their obligations under international law, as we said before, including international humanitarian law and human rights law. The draft resolution also emphasizes the need for the parties to abide by the pertinent resolutions adopted by this Council, including resolutions 2712 and 2720 of 2023. The E10 have adopted a consultative approach during the negotiation process of this text. We have consulted extensively and in good faith with all members of this Council in a frank, open, and flexible manner with the aim of achieving a text that addresses the situation in Gaza. The adoption of this draft resolution will certainly be another important step this Council can build upon to comprehensively address the crisis in Gaza. Given the utmost urgency of the situation, we call upon all members of this Council, all and each member of this Council, to vote in favor of this resolution. While this resolution is crucial, it is essential that we continue working towards a comprehensive ceasefire and a lasting peace in the region. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Господин председатель,
Mr. President,
мы весьма разочарованы и
we are
озадачены,
extremely stunned
как
and
велась работа
disappointed
над
about the
проектом
way the
резолюции в
work on
последние
the draft
24
resolution in the
часа.
last 24 hours was done.
О том, что слово permanent
The fact that the
в
word
оперативном
permanent
параграфе
in
1
OP1
применительно к прекращению огня предлагается
relation
заменить
to a
на более
ceasefire is
слабую
proposed to be
формулировку.
replaced by a more weak wording.
Мы узнали чуть более чем
Was
за час до
something
начала
we
заседания.
learned about a little more than an hour before the beginning of the meeting.
Это недопустимо.
That is unacceptable.
Мы все получали
We all
инструкции
received
на голосование
instructions
по
for the
тексту, в
vote
котором
on
было
the
слово
text
permanent,
that contained the
и
word
считаем это
permanent,
принципиально
and we
важным.
believe that that is of fundamental importance.
Все остальные формулировки
All of the
оставляют
remaining
слишком большое
wording,
поле для интерпретации,
leaves too broad an area for interpretation,
что может позволить
which
Израилю
could allow
возобновить
Israel
военную
to
операцию в
resume its
секторе
military
Газа
operation in the
в
Gaza
любой
Strip
момент
at any
после
moment
истечения
following the
прекращения огня,
expiry of the ceasefire,
которое, надеемся, сегодня
which
будет
we
установлено.
today hope will be established.
С тем, чтобы избежать такого
In order
сценария,
to
мы хотим
avoid
внести
this
в текст
scenario, we
устную
would like to
поправку и
make an
вернуть
oral
слово
amendment to the
permanent
text and
в
return the
оперативный
word
параграф
permanent
1.
in
Таким
OP1.
образом, он
In
будет
so
звучать
doing,
так,
it
как
would
это
read
звучало
as it
в
read
прежде изданной резолюции,
in
а
the
именно
previously issued resolution, namely,
demands an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan, respected by all parties, leading to a permanent sustainable ceasefire, and also demands the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, as well as ensuring humanitarian access to address their medical and other humanitarian needs, and further demands that the parties comply with their obligations under international law in relation to all persons they detain. Благодарю вас.
thank you.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for their statement. Members of the Council have before them a proposed amendment submitted by Russian Federation to the text of the draft resolution contained in the document S/2024/254 submitted by Algeria, Ecuador, Guyana, Japan, Malta, Mozambique, Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, Slovenia, and Switzerland. Rule 36 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure states, inter alia, the following. When an amendment adds to or deletes from the text of a motion or draft resolution, that amendment shall be voted on first. Accordingly, I intend to put the proposed amendment to the vote first. Will those in favor of proposed amendment please raise their hand? Against? Abstentions? The result of the voting is as follows. 3 votes in favor, 1 vote against, 11 abstentions. The proposed amendment has not been adopted, having failed to obtain the required number of votes. I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2024/254 please raise their hand? Those against? Abstention? The result of the voting is as follows. 14 votes in favor, 0 vote against, 1 abstention. The draft resolution has been adopted as Resolution 2728, 2024. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. I give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President.
أود أن أشكر جميع
I would
أعضاء
like to thank
المجلس
all
على
the council
المرونة
members for their
والعمل
flexibility
البناء
and the constructive way
الذي مكننا اليوم
that allowed us
من
today
اعتماد قرار
to adopt
طال انتظاره.
this long-awaited resolution.
قرار يطلب وقف إطلاق
A
النار بغزة
resolution that calls
فوراً
for an immediate
من
ceasefire
أجل
in the Gaza Strip
وضع حد
in order
للمجازر
to put an end to
التي
the
لا تزال
massacres
للأسف
that
مستمرة منذ
unfortunately
أكثر
are
من
still
5 أشهر.
ongoing over the
5
past
أشهر.
5 months.
ذاق خلالها الشعب الفلسطيني كل
Over
أشكال
the past
العذاب
5 months,
كل أشكال
the Palestinian
المعاناة.
people has suffered
لقد
greatly.
استمر حمام الدم طويلا
This bloodbath
وبأشكال
has
بشعة.
continued for far too long.
وأصبح من الواجب وضع حد له.
It is our
قبل
obligation to put an
الأوان.
end to this bloodbath before
أخيراً.
it is too late.
أخيرا
Finally,
يرتقي مجلس الأمن لحجم
the
المسؤوليات
Security
التي
Council
تقع عليه
is shouldering its responsibility
باعتباره المسؤول الأول
as the
عن حفظ
primary
السلم
organ
والأمن
responsible
الدوليين
for maintaining international peace
ويستجيب
and security.
لمطالب
It is finally
لمطالب الشعوب
responding to the
والمجموعة
calls
الدولية
of the international
كما
community.
بها مرارا وتكرارا
These repeated
السيد
calls,
الأمين العام أنطونيو غوتيريش
not only from the international
الذي
community, but also from the Secretary General,
نجدد له
Mr. Antonio Guterres.
الدعم
And once again, we
على
renew
موقفه
our
النبيل
support to the Secretary General
و
for his noble position
مناصرته
and for his
للحق.
support to this just cause.
وهذا رغم الحملات المغرضة
Despite
و-
the heinous
التي
campaigns
يتعرض لها
that were launched
سيد
against him.
الرئيس
Mr. President,
عند التصويت على مشروع قرار التي
when
تقدمت
we
به
voted
الجزائر الشهر
on
الماضي
the draft resolution tabled by
وعدنا.
Algeria last month,
وعدنا بأننا
promised
لن نكل
that
ولن
we
نمل
will spare no
حتى
effort.
يتحمل مجلس الأمن
We will continue
مسؤولياته
to work
كاملة
hard to make sure that the Security
غير
Council
منقوصة
is abiding by its full responsibility.
ووعدنا بأننا
We also promised
سنعود
that we will
لنقرع
come back
مجددا
once again
أبواب مجلس الأمن
to knock on the doors
وها.
of the Security Council.
قد عدنا اليوم
And here we are
مع
today,
جميع الدول المنتخبة بالمجلس
all 10
في رسالة
elected
واضحة
member states,
للشعب الفلسطيني
to convey a clear message to the Palestinian people.
مفادها أن
This
المجموعة
message is
الدولية
as follows.
بمختلف
The international community
أطيافها
in its entirety
تشعر تشعر ولم تتخلى عنكم
did not abandon you,
تشعر بآلامكم
feels your
ولم
suffering.
تتخلى عنكم سيد الرئيس
It did not abandon you. Mr. President,
إن اعتماد قرار اليوم
adopting today's
ما
resolution
هو إلا بداية
is only the beginning
نحو تحقيق آمال الشعب الفلسطيني
to meet the aspirations
و-
of the Palestinian people.
ونتطلع بالتزام المحتل الإسرائيلي
We look forward
بهذا
to the
القرار.
commitment and the
وأن
compliance of the Israeli
يتوقف
occupying
القتل
power with
فورا
this resolution
ومن
them
دون
to
شروط
put an end to the
وترفع
bloodbath without any
المعاناة
conditions,
عن الشعب
to
الفلسطيني
and the suffering of the
ومجلس الأمن
Palestinian people.
من واجبه
It is the
أن يسهر
responsibility
على
of the
ضمان
Security Council
تنفيذ
to
أحكام
ensure
هذا
the
القرار
implementation of the provisions of
في
this
الأخير
resolution.
سيد الرئيس أؤكد
In conclusion, Mr.
أن
President,
الجزائر ستعود
I reaffirm that
قريبا
Algeria
لتخاطب مجلس الأمن
will
مرة أخرى
return once again before
في
the
ظل
Security Council
توجيهات رئيس الجمهورية السيد عبد المجيد تبون
under the instructions of
حتى
His
تكون
Excellency the
دولة
President of the
فلسطين
Republic
في
to
مكانها
make sure
الطبيعي
that Palestine returns
عضواً
to its
كاملاً
natural
عضوا
status
كاملا
as a full-fledged
وسيداً
member,
بالأمم
a
المتحدة
sovereign
وشكراً.
member states of the United Nations. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the top, I want to express my deepest condolences to the families and loved ones of last week's terrorist attack in Moscow. We condemn terrorism in all its forms and stand in solidarity with the Russian people in grieving the loss of life from this horrific event. Colleagues, today this Council spoke out in support of the ongoing diplomatic efforts led by the United States, Qatar, Egypt, to bring about an immediate and sustainable ceasefire, secure the immediate release of all hostages, and help alleviate the tremendous suffering of Palestinian civilians in Gaza who are in dire need of protection and life-saving humanitarian assistance. The United States fully supports these critical objectives. In fact, they were the foundation of the resolution we put forward last week, a resolution that Russia and China vetoed. But colleagues, the United States' support for these objectives is not simply rhetorical. We're working around the clock to make them real, on the ground, through diplomacy, because we know that it is only through diplomacy that we can push this agenda forward. We're getting closer to a deal for an immediate ceasefire with the release of all hostages, but we're not there yet. Now let's be clear. A ceasefire could have come about months ago if Hamas had been willing to release hostages, months ago. Instead, Hamas continues to stand in the way of peace, to throw up roadblocks, cower in tunnels beneath Gaza cities and behind under civilian infrastructure and hide among the civilian population. So today my ask to members of this Council and to member states in every region of the world is this: speak out and demand unequivocally that Hamas accepts the deal on the table. Now, I hope I'm wrong, I really do, but I don't expect that from Russia and China, especially because they still can't bring themselves to condemn Hamas's terrorist attacks on October 7th. Just last week, Russia and China vetoed a resolution that condemned this horrific attack, a resolution the vast majority of this Council supported. They have shown time and time again that they are not actually interested in advancing a durable peace through diplomatic efforts, nor for all their rhetoric are they interested in making any meaningful contributions to humanitarian efforts. Instead, they are using this devastating conflict as a political cudgel to try to divide this Council at a time when we need to come together. It is deeply, deeply cynical, and we should all see through it. Colleagues, we appreciated the willingness of members of this Council to take some of our edits and improve on this resolution. Still, certain key edits were ignored, including our request to add a condemnation of Hamas. And we did not agree with everything in the resolution. For that reason, we were unfortunately not able to vote yes. However, as I've said before, we fully support some of the critical objectives in this non-binding resolution, and we believe it was important for the Council to speak out and make clear that our ceasefire any ceasefire must come with the release of all hostages. Indeed, as I've said before, the only path to a durable end to this conflict is the release of all hostages. Critically, a ceasefire and the release of hostages will allow much more humanitarian aid to get into Gaza at a time when famine is looming large, and provide an opportunity to work toward a sustainable cessation of hostilities, toward a future where Hamas can no longer threaten Israel and never repeat October 7th, and no longer control Gaza and use civilians as shields, toward a future where Palestinians and Israelis live side by side in peace in two democratic states of their own, something that will never happen with Hamas, a terrorist organization dedicated to the destruction of Israel and the killing of Jews, a terrorist organization this body still fails to condemn, controlling Gaza. Colleagues, we meet during the holy month of Ramadan. This should be a season of peace for Muslim communities around the world. Just as October 7th, Simchat Torah, should have been a day of peace for Jewish communities. This resolution rightly acknowledges that during the month of Ramadan, we must recommit to peace. Hamas can do that by accepting the deal on the table. A ceasefire can begin immediately with the release of the first hostage. And so we must put pressure on Hamas to do just that. This is the only path to securing a ceasefire and the release of hostages, as we have all called for today. That is what this resolution means. A ceasefire of any duration must come with the release of hostages. This is the only path. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Today is an important day. Most of all, we hope it will signal an important day for the people of the Middle East, a day that will help silence the guns, stop the killing, free the hostages, as well as bring some calm to and clear the sky over Gaza. The day that marks the beginning of the end of pain and suffering of civilians. This is a significant day for the elected members. We found our voice of an unifying force inside the Council. This is the reason why we are on the Council. We showed a leadership for peace. And it is a good day for the whole Council, as we aligned our efforts and decision with the calls coming from the UN General Assembly and the UN Secretary General, from the humanitarian organizations, and from the world public. We demonstrated that we can find unity for peace, a small step in rebuilding trust in the Council. Today's resolution is just the beginning. We will need more of this unity for Gaza, as well as for many other conflicts, and Slovenia is ready. Mr. President, I don't need, but I wish to thank my colleagues, the elected members, as we went through the process together. This is Slovenia's third month on the Council, and we are looking forward to many more joint ventures together in search of peace. I wanted to thank the permanent members for giving us a chance, for having trust in the power of the EU10, and for being patient during negotiations. Mr. President, we delivered the strongest signal thus far. We demand an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan, leading to lasting, sustainable ceasefire. It is a call we have all been desperate to hear from the Council. A short and focused resolution is a firm sign from the Council that this conflict must stop. It offers an opportunity for peace for Palestinians and an opportunity for diplomatic efforts, including those of Egypt, Qatar, and the US, to continue. We express our appreciation for the commitment of the Secretary General, UN staff members on the ground, humanitarian coordinators, as well as for the leadership of different UN agencies, humanitarian and health organizations, including UNRWA. We recall the binding nature of the Security Council resolutions and call for swift implementation of this clear resolution, in particular with regards to the ceasefire, the unconditional release of hostages, and the urgent need for expansion of the flow of humanitarian aid. We also reiterate our call for full respect of international law, including international humanitarian law and human rights law. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today's adoption of the resolution proposed by the E10, including the Republic of Korea, has a historic meaning in that it is the very first resolution by this Council that demands a ceasefire in Gaza. After numerous attempts by the Council and consistent appeals by the UN Secretary General, OCHA, and so on, amid rising death tolls. It is also significant that this is the first ever resolution introduced by the E10 and adopted on a Security Council regional agenda item. As one of the E10, the Republic of Korea is pleased by today's adoption of the resolution and commends the dedicated efforts of all E10 colleagues, including Mozambique, E10 coordinator, Algeria, representing the views of the Arab world, and Japan, the presidency of the Council, in the process of drafting and negotiating the resolution. In addition, we appreciate the cooperation of the P5, in particular the U.S., for its sincere and utmost coordination with the E10 in the spirit of compromise. In order for today's resolution to have concrete significance beyond the internal politics of the Security Council, it must have a tangible impact on the situation in the Gaza Strip by saving the lives of innocent civilians and easing the humanitarian crisis. The situation on the ground in Gaza must be different before and after this resolution. This will only be possible when both Israel and Hamas respect and faithfully implement this resolution. Even though it is not explicitly coercive under Chapter 7 of the Charter, the parties to the conflict must bear in mind that this resolution reflects the consensus of the international community, one forged through active discussion in the Security Council and General Assembly for more than 5 months. The most important thing is implementing the ceasefire starting right now. As defined in the resolution, violence and firing must be ceased immediately. Hostages taken by Hamas and other groups must be returned to their families right away. Barriers to the provision of humanitarian assistance must be lifted. The entire international community must also actively cooperate to save civilian lives and overcome acute food insecurity through humanitarian aid at scale. Restore basic public order and improve Gaza's fundamental public services, including health and sanitation. And based on these achievements, preparations for redoubled political and diplomatic dialogue to resolve the Palestinian question in the long term must commence step by step. All parties will have to take a step back and respond to the global call to participate in the cause of restoring peace and humanity. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Republic of Korea for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. At the offset, I wish to express our condolences to the Russian Federation for the atrocious terrorist attack of last week. We condemn all terrorism in all its form. Malta was proud to co-pen this resolution, which we have just adopted, which calls for a ceasefire for the month of Ramadan, leading to a lasting, sustainable ceasefire. With this resolution, the Security Council has clearly spoken out on the urgent and pressing need to stop the fighting. This is critical to alleviate the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. This resolution must now be immediately and unconditionally implemented by all parties. The fighting needs to stop without further delays. All hostages must be safely released. On this occasion, we also express our appreciation and support for the ongoing negotiations by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States. We sincerely hope that these diplomatic efforts can lead to tangible results in the coming days. Meanwhile, humanitarian access to the Gaza Strip is of critical importance to avert the risk of famine. There is the urgent need to expand the flow of humanitarian assistance and in demanding the lifting of all barriers preventing the necessary humanitarian assistance as requested by this resolution. In closing, President, a sustainable ceasefire must also be accompanied by a political urgency to build a durable foundation for peace. Malta reaffirms its commitment to a just and comprehensive resolution of the conflict based on a two-state solution along the pre-1967 borders, addressing the legitimate aspirations of both sides, with Jerusalem as a future capital of two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security, in line with the relevant Security Council resolutions and internationally agreed parameters. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
la France se
France
félicite de l'adoption
welcomes
de la résolution
the adoption of
27-28.
Resolution
Plus de
2728.
mois
More than
après le
5
début de la
months
crise à
after the
Gaza,
beginning of the crisis in
provoquée par
Gaza,
l'attaque
caused
terroriste
by
du
the
Hamas,
terrorist attack
il
waged
était
by
temps que le
Hamas,
Conseil de
it was
sécurité
high
puisse
time for the
enfin
Security
agir.
Council to act.
Il était temps qu'il
It was
établisse
high
un
time for it to
cessez-le-feu.
establish a
Il était temps
ceasefire.
qu'il exige
It was
la
high time
libération
for
des
it to
otages.
demand the
Il
release of
était temps qu'il
hostages. It was
réclame
high
un
time for
accès
it to
humanitaire
call
complet
for
et une aide
comprehensive
massive
humanitarian access
alors
and
que la
mass
famine
aid at a
sévit
time when
à Gaza.
famine is rife in Gaza.
L'adoption de cette
The
résolution
adoption of this
montre que le
resolution
Conseil de sécurité
demonstrates
peut
that the
encore
Security
agir
Council can still
quand
act
tous ses membres
when all
font
of
les
its
efforts
members
nécessaires
make the
pour qu'il
necessary
puisse
effort
remplir son mandat.
to discharge
Je
their
tiens à cet
mandate.
égard
I wish in this
à saluer
connection to
personnellement le
personally
rôle de la représentante
commend
permanente des
the
États-Unis.
permanent representative of the
Le
United States for
silence
the role
du Conseil
played.
de
The Security
sécurité
Council's
sur Gaza
silence on
devenait
Gaza
assourdissant.
was becoming
Il
deafening.
est temps qu'il puisse
It
enfin
is high time
contribuer
now for
à
the
une
Council
sortie de
to
crise.
finally contribute to finding a
Celle-ci
solution
n'est
to
pas
this
terminée,
crisis.
hélas.
This crisis is not
Et notre
over,
Conseil va
alas,
devoir
and our
rester
Council will have
mobilisé
to
et
remain mobilized
immédiatement
and
se remettre à la tâche.
immediately get
Il
back
va
to
devoir,
work. It will
après le
have
Ramadan,
to, following
qui se
Ramadan,
termine dans 2
which
semaines,
finishes in 2 weeks,
établir un
it will have
cessez-le-feu
to
permanent.
establish a permanent
Il lui faudra
ceasefire.
œuvrer
It will
au
need
relèvement
to strive
et à la
to
stabilisation
see
de
the
Gaza.
recovery and
Enfin
stabilization
et
of
surtout,
Gaza.
le
Finally,
Conseil
and
de
above all,
sécurité
the Security
aura
Council
à remettre
will
un
have
processus
to
politique sur les rails
get a political
visant
process
à
back on track,
l'établissement
a
de la
political
solution des
process
deux États,
aiming to
la
bring
seule
about
à
the
même de
two-state
garantir la
solution,
paix.
the only solution able
Notre
to guarantee
Conseil ne
peace.
pourra
Our
naturellement se
Council, of
substituer aux
course,
partis,
cannot
mais
replace
son
the
rôle sera
parties
central.
to the
La
parties, but
France
its role
prendra
will
ses
be a pivotal one.
responsabilités
France will
et
shoulder its
proposera dans les
responsibilities
jours
and
qui
will
viennent
propose
une
in the coming
initiative au
days
Conseil de
an
sécurité.
initiative within the
Je vous
Security
remercie.
Council. I thank you.
I thank the representative of France for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr.
La Suisse a
President.
voté en
Switzerland
faveur de ce projet de
voted in
résolution et
favour
salue
of
son
this draft
adoption par le
resolution
Conseil
and
de
welcomes its
sécurité.
adoption by the
C'est
Security Council.
enfin un signe d'espoir.
This is at last a
Car
sign
ce
of
vote
hope.
doit marquer un
This
retour
vote
vers
should
plus
mark a return
d'humanité
to
dans le conflit
greater
au Proche-Orient.
humanity in the Middle East
La
conflict.
dignité humaine et la
Human
décence
dignity and
doivent nous
decency
définir comme communes,
must
restaurer les
medical care,
infrastructures
restore
médicales,
medical
soulager le
infrastructure,
personnel médical et lui
relieve the
permettre
burden on medical
d'accomplir à
personnel,
lui aussi
and
sa
enable them
mission
also
sans
to carry
danger.
out their mission without
La
danger.
résolution formule aussi une
The
demande
resolution
claire
also
pour la
makes a clear
libération
demand for
immédiate
the
et
immediate and
inconditionnelle des
unconditional
otages
release
qui,
of the
eux
hostages,
aussi, ainsi que
who,
leurs familles,
they
doivent
too,
pouvoir se
along with their
retrouver
families,
enfin
must be
sains et
allowed
saufs.
to return home
Leur
safe and
capture
sound.
lors des actes
Their
terroristes du 7
capture during the
octobre que la
attacks of
Suisse a
terror
fermement
of
condamné
October the 7th, which
contrevient
Switzerland
au
strongly
droit
condemned,
international.
contravenes international law.
Le résultat d'aujourd'hui est un appel
Today's
clair
outcome
lancé à
is
toutes
a
les
clear
parties de
call
cesser
to
les
all parties
hostilités
to cease
et de
hostilities
respecter
and
pleinement
finally
enfin leurs
fully
obligations en vertu
respect
du droit
their
international,
obligations under
notamment du
international
droit
law,
international
in
humanitaire et
particular
des droits
international
humains.
humanitarian and
Pour une
human
mise en
rights
œuvre
law.
efficace de la résolution
For the
que nous venons
resolution we have
d'adopter,
just adopted to
le
be effectively
cessez-le-feu immédiat
implemented,
devra sans
the
attendre
immediate
mener à un
ceasefire must
cessez-le-feu
lead without
durable.
delay to a
De
lasting,
même,
sustainable
étant donné
ceasefire.
les conséquences
Similarly,
humanitaires
given the
catastrophiques
catastrophic
qu'aurait une opération
humanitarian
de large
consequences that
envergure
a
à
large-scale
Rafah sur la
operation in
population
Rafah
civile
would have
et
on the
les
civilian
opérations
population
humanitaires,
and
une telle
humanitarian
opération
operations,
doit être
such
évitée.
an operation must be
Monsieur le
avoided.
Président,
Mr.
le
President,
secrétaire général hier au
the
passage de
Secretary
Rafah a
General said
dit
yesterday
il
at
est
the
temps
Rafah
de faire
crossing,
taire les
it's
armes.
time to silence the guns.
L'espoir, c'est d'être capable de voir
is
la
being able
lumière
to see
malgré
the
les
light
ténèbres.
in spite of the
Avec
darkness.
l'adoption de la résolution
With the
aujourd'hui,
adoption of the
il est
resolution
maintenant grand
today,
temps de
it is now
reprendre
time
espoir
to
et de
regain hope
travailler
and to
ensemble,
work
sans
together
relâche, à une
relentlessly
perspective de paix
towards a
durable,
prospect of
une
lasting
solution à
peace,
deux
a
États
two-state
où Israéliens
solution
et
where
Palestiniens
Israelis
peuvent
and
vivre côte à côte
Palestinians
en
can live
paix,
side by
en
side
sécurité
in
et en
peace, peace,
dignité.
security
Je
and
vous remercie.
dignity. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席先
I
生。
thank you, Mr. President.
主席先生，
Mr. President,
中方对刚才的决议草案投了
China
赞成票
voted。in favor of the draft resolution
我
that
们
has
感
just
谢
been put
阿
to
尔
the
及
vote.
利亚
We thank
莫桑比
Algeria,
克
Mozambique,
等非常任理
and
事
other
国所
elected
做出的
council
努力。
members for their efforts.
上周五，
Last Friday,
安理会就
the
美
Security
国提出
Council
的另一份
voted on the
关于
other
加
draft
沙局
resolution
势的决议
proposed
草
by
案
the
进行
United
表决
States。on the situation in
中方
Gaza.
同阿尔及利亚
China, together with
俄罗斯一
Algeria
道
and Russia,
投了反对票。
voted against it.
对比两
A
项草
comparison
案，
of the two
可以
drafts
看出
shows
区别所
the
在。
differences.
当前的
The current
草案
draft
态度鲜明
is，unequivocal
方向
and
明
correct
确，
in its direction,
要求立即停火。
demanding an immediate
前一
ceasefire,
份草案
while the previous
是
one
拐弯
has
抹角、
been evasive
含混其辞。
and ambiguous.
当前的草
The
案
current draft
要求无条件
demands
停火，
an unconditional
前一
ceasefire,
份草案
while the previous
却为
one
停火
has set
设置前提。
preconditions for ceasefire.
当前的草案
The current draft
反映了国际
reflects
社会
the general
普遍期待
expectations of the international
得到
community
阿拉伯国
and
家
enjoys
集
the
体支持
collective support of the Arab
前一份
states,
草案
while
却
the
遭
previous
到
one
阿拉
has
伯
been
国家的
jointly
共同反对。
rejected by the Arab states.
两份草案分歧点
The differences between
归
the
根
two
到底
drafts
不是别
boil
的，
down to
而是
nothing,
要不要
but whether
立即
there should
无
be
条件
an
停火，
immediate and
能不能
unconditional
允许
ceasefire,
对
and
加沙
whether
民
the
众的
collective
集体惩
punishment
罚
of the people
继
of
续下去。
Gaza should be allowed to
在这个
continue.
问题上，
On this issue,
中方
China,
同国际社会
like
大多
most
数成员
members
一样，
of the international
从一
community,
开始
has been
态度就
very
是非
clear
常
from the
明
very
确的。
outset.
无论是
Whether
上周五投反
we
对票，
voted against it
还
last
是今
Friday
天投
or
赞成
in
票，
favor of it today,
都是基于
our
我
vote
们一以
was
贯
based
之的
on our
立场和
consistent
主张。
position and propositions.
美国在多次否决安理会行动之后，
After repeated
终
vetoes
于
of
决
the
定
Council
不
actions,
再阻
the
挠
United
安理
States
会要求
finally
立
decided
即
to
停火
stop
的努力。
obstructing the Council's demand for an immediate
尽管如
ceasefire.
此，
Despite all
美
this,
方仍然寻找
the
种种借口，
U.S. still
对中国
tried to
进行
find
指责。
all kinds of excuses and made accusations against
国
China.
际社会的眼睛是雪
The,
亮的，
the eyes of the international
美方的
community
指
and
责
are open and
完全
discerning.
站不住脚。
The accusations of the U.S.
恰恰
are
相反。
untenable. On the
正是
contrary,
中国和有关国家
it's
坚
because
持原
of
则，
China and other countries
主持正义，
concerned,
才
because of our
迫使
upholding of
美国
principles
认识
and
到
justice, then
美
the U.S.
不能
we force the
也
U.S.
无
to
法
realize
再
that
继续
it
阻挠安
cannot
理会
continue
朝着正确
to
方向
obstruct the
迈
efforts
出
of the
关键步
Council
伐。
to move in the right
正义
direction and
终将
take
胜利。
the decisive step. And justice will prevail in
主
the
席先
end.
生，
Mr.
加沙
President,
冲突爆发近6个月，
nearly 6 months after the outbreak of the
32000
Gaza
多无辜平
conflict,
民被夺去
over
生命。
32,000
对于已
innocent
经逝去的生命，
civilians have lost their
安理会
lives.
今
For
天
the
的决
lives
议
that have
来得
already
太迟了。
perished, the Council resolution
但对于
today
上
comes
百
too
万
late. But
仍
for the
深
millions
陷
of
前
people
所
in
未有
Gaza
人道
who
灾难的
remain
加沙民众来
mired
说，
in an
这
unprecedented
项决议
humanitarian
如果
catastrophe,
能得到
this
全面
resolution, if
有效落
fully
实，
and effectively
还
implemented,
是可以带
could
来
still
期待已久
bring
的希望。
long-awaited hope.
安理会决议
Security Council
是有约束力
resolutions
的。
are binding.
我们要求
We
当事
call
方
on
履
the
行
parties
联合国宪
concerned
章
to
规定
fulfill
的义
their
务，
obligations under the United
根
Nations
据决
Charter
议要求
and to
采
take
取
due
应
action
有
as
行动。
required by the
我
resolution.
们期待有
We
重要
expect
影响的
the
国家
state
对
with
当事方
significant
发挥
influence
积
to
极作
play a
用，
positive
包
role
括
on the
采取
party
一切
concerned,
有效
including
手
by
段
using all necessary
支持
and
决议
effective
的
means
实
at
施。
their disposal to support the implementation of the resolution.
必须立
To
即
this
停止一
end,
切
all
伤害
harm
平民
to
的行为，
civilians must cease
必须
immediately,
立即制止
and
对加沙的
the
进攻。
offensive against Gaza must
在
be
3月
prevented
实现
at
停火，
once. A ceasefire
只是
during the
第一步，
month of Ramadan
必须
is
以
only
此
the
为基
first
础，
step
迈
that
向
must serve
持
as the
久停战，
basis leading to a
让被
lasting,
迫逃离
sustainable
的加沙民
ceasefire,
众
and
早
the
日
early
返回
return
家园。
of the people of Gaza who were forced to flee
同时
their homes.
必须立即
At
解
the
除
same
对加沙
time,
的封
the
锁
blockade of
和
Gaza
对人道物资
and
准入的
the
人
man-made
为
barriers to
设障，
access of humanitarian supplies
保
must
障
be lifted
人道物资
immediately
充足、
to
快
ensure
速
that
进入加
humanitarian
沙，
supplies enter
安
Gaza
全及
in
时送
sufficient
到
quantities
有需要的民
expeditiously
众手
to
中。
reach people in
我
need
们赞
in a
赏古
safe
特雷斯
and
秘书长和
timely
联合国
manner.
人道
We
机构
appreciate
所做出的努
SG
力。
Guterres and the
以色列应
humanitarian
该全
agencies
面
for their
配合
efforts.
开放拉法和
Israel
其他陆地
must
口岸。
fully cooperate
联合国近
to
东巴勒斯坦难
open
民救济和工程处
the
Gaza
Rafah and
民众
other land
获得
crossings.
国际人道援助
UNRWA is
不可或
indispensable
缺。
and
无法替代。
irreplaceable for the people
我
of
们
Gaza
敦
to
促各
receive
方
international
尽
humanitarian
快全
assistance.
面恢复
We urge
对
all
工程
parties
处的
to
供
fully
资。
restore funding to
以色
UNRWA
列
as soon
近
as
期对工
possible.
程处和整个联合国
We
系统
categorically
发起
reject
了恶意攻
Israel's
击。
recent
我们
vicious
对此
campaign of
坚决
attacks
反对。
against UNRWA and the
我
United
们
Nations
欢迎
system as a
埃
whole.
及、
We welcome the
卡塔尔、
efforts of
美
Egypt,
国推动
Qatar,
释
and the
放人
United
质的
States
努力，
to promote the
期
release of
待
the
全部
hostages
人质
and expect
和
the
被
speedy
扣押人员
release of all
尽快获
hostages
释，
and
早
detainees
日回家。
and their early return home.
主席先生，
Mr.
安理
President,
会
the Security Council,
要在今天通过的决议基础上，
based
继
on
续
the
密
adopted
切关
resolution
注加沙
today,
局势，
continue to follow
为
closely the
采
situation
取
in
进一
Gaza
步必要行动
and get
做好准
ready
备，
for further
确保
actions
决议
when
得到
necessary
及
and
时
ensure the
充分的
timely
实
and
行。
full implementation of
中方
its
将继续同
resolutions.
各方一道，
China will continue
为
to make
早日
unremitting
平息加
efforts
沙战
together
火，
with all
缓解
parties
人
to
道
bring
灾
an
难，
early end to
落
the
实
fighting
两
in
国方案，
Gaza,
做
alleviate
出
the
不懈
humanitarian
努力。
catastrophe,
谢谢
and
主席。
implement the two-state solution. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Gracias, presidente.
Thank you,
El
Mr.
Ecuador
President.
condena los
Ecuador
ataques terroristas en
condemns the
Moscú
terrorist attacks in
y expresamos
Moscow.
nuestra
We
solidaridad a las
express our
familias de las víctimas y
solidarity
al pueblo
to the
ruso.
families and the victims
Señor presidente,
and to the Russian people, Mr.
el
President.
proyecto que hemos
The
considerado
resolution
nació
that
como
we
una
have
idea de los
considered
miembros
gives us
elegidos
an idea
de preparar un texto
gives us an idea
que
of
pueda
how the
ser
elected members
aceptable
can
para
prepare a
todos los
text that
miembros
can
del
be acceptable
Consejo
to all
y le
members
permita
of the Council.
pronunciarse
It allows the
oportunamente
Council to
frente
speak
a una
out in a
situación
timely
humanitaria
fashion
en
in the face
constante
of
deterioro.
a humanitarian situation which
Por esto,
continues to worsen.
el texto es corto
Consequently, the text
y
is
demanda
short
un
and
cese al fuego
demands
por el mes del
a
Ramadán que
ceasefire for the month
permita
of
aliviar
Ramadan,
la
which
situación de la
will bring
población civil
relief to the
al
civilian
tiempo que exige la
population.
liberación
At the
inmediata e
same time, it
incondicional de
demands the
todos los
immediate and
rehenes
unconditional
y
release of
deplora
all
la violencia
hostages
contra
and
civiles
deplores the
y
violence
todos los
against
actos de
civilians
terrorismo,
and all
incluyendo implícitamente
victims
los execrables actos
of
cometidos por
acts of
Hamas en
terrorism,
octubre
including
pasado.
the execrable acts committed
Asimismo,
by Hamas in
el texto toma
October.
notas
The
de los
text
denodados
also takes
esfuerzos que
notes
viene
of
realizando
the
Egipto,
efforts
Qatar y
that
Estados
Egypt,
Unidos
Qatar and the
para
US
lograr
are
un
making
acuerdo entre
to
las partes en el
achieve an
conflicto
agreement
que
between the
esperamos
parties to the
sean
conflict.
exitosos.
We hope those efforts will bear
El Ecuador
fruit.
ha votado a favor de
Ecuador
este
voted
proyecto de
in favor
resolución
of this
y se
draft
alegra de que haya
resolution,
sido
and we are
adoptado.
delighted that it has been
Valoramos la
adopted.
flexibilidad
We
demostrada
value
en
the
esta ocasión por todos los miembros
flexibility shown on
ante
this
una
occasion by
situación
all
tan
members in the
apremiante como la
face
que
of
se
a
vive en Gaza.
situation as urgent as
Debemos
that in
ahora
Gaza.
todos
We must now
velar por
all
la
together
implementación
ensure
completa,
that this
efectiva
resolution is
e inmediata
completely,
de lo que hemos
effectively
decidido.
and
Muchas
immediately
gracias.
implemented. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Guyana condemns the terrorist attack that occurred in Moscow last week and also extend our condolences to the government and people of Russia. Mr. President, colleagues, Guyana is pleased that this Council has finally been able to adopt a resolution which demands an immediate ceasefire, albeit for the month of Ramadan, leading to a lasting and sustainable ceasefire. After more than 5 months of a war of utter terror and destruction, a ceasefire is the difference between life and death for the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and others. This demand comes at a significant time as Palestinians are observing the holy month of Ramadan. Sadly, this year's Ramadan is different for Palestinians, fatally different. The observance began as people weep over the killing of their loved ones, while bombs and bullets continue to fall indiscriminately around them. 17,000 children began Ramadan as orphans owing to this war. 70,000 families began Ramadan without a home, all rubble. Another 290,000 homes severely damaged. Instead of being in their homes, the sacred place where they usually pray, break fast, and commune with family and friends during this holy month, 3/4 of the population of Gaza are internally displaced. Ramadan is also a time for families to join for nightly feasts and a time to share food and other blessings with the less fortunate. But for the people in Gaza, there is man-made starvation, and we are already seeing evidence of a man-made famine. All of this when there is food available, but deliberately withheld. Women and children are disproportionately impacted. They represent the majority of those killed. Children and pregnant and lactating women are at higher risk of mortality due to lack of adequate nutrition. At the same time, the anguish of the families of the hostages held in Gaza continues to mount with no clear prospect for the return of their loved ones. Palestinians experience the same anguish, waiting for their relatives who are illegally detained in Israel to come home. Guyana emphasizes the demand for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. We also demand the release of all Palestinians held in Israeli jails without trial. Mr. President, colleagues, the realities that the population of Gaza has been facing since 7th of October have worsened with each passing day as the occupying power continues its atrocities. Given these realities and the consensus by elected members of this council that we must act, Guyana unhesitatingly collaborated with fellow elected members to put forward this draft resolution for an immediate ceasefire, the unconditional release of hostages, and for expanding humanitarian assistance. In this regard, we thank the coordinator of the E10, His Excellency Ambassador Pedro Comissario, and the delegation of Mozambique for their leadership of this process. We also thank our E10 colleagues and our P5 colleagues for finally, collectively, doing right by the Palestinian people. It is long overdue, but it is still the right thing to have done to stop the indignities against the Palestinian people. But this is just the beginning. The task before us now is to secure full compliance with this resolution and its predecessors, including 2712 and 2720. In this regard, Guyana calls for full adherence to these resolutions. Finally, Mr. President, dear colleagues, the holy month of Ramadan will end in a mere 15 days. It is therefore essential that this Council and those with influence on the parties immediately redouble efforts to bring about the lasting and sustainable ceasefire this resolution calls for, to secure the release of hostages and to massively scale up humanitarian assistance. This is absolutely necessary to save lives, begin the reconstruction of Gaza, and to create a free state of Palestine with which Israel peacefully coexists. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Mr. President, Sierra Leone also expresses deepest condolences to the government and people of the Russian Federation following the heinous terrorist attacks last week. Terrorism and acts of terrorism in all forms and manifestation are condemnable and unjustifiable. Mr. President, the consideration and adoption of Resolution 2728, co-penned by the elected 10 members of the Council, including Sierra Leone, was born out of the need to address the current plight of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, especially during this holy month of Ramadan, a time traditionally filled with peace, love, and devotion amongst families and communities. We recognize the Palestinian people's collective struggle, facing each day in hardship, loss, displacement, and hunger. With that in mind, the E10 initiated the resolution just adopted, built on the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, including the responsibility of the Security Council in the United Nations Collective Security Scheme. With a clear imperative to act as mandated, but also with the establishment of a moral and political imperative, the Security Council demands an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan, respected by all parties, leading to a lasting, sustainable ceasefire. The fighting must stop. The killings must stop. The suffering and collective punishment must end. The parties to the conflict are under obligation to respect this demand of the Security Council. The parties are urged to fully implement this resolution 2728, as well as resolutions 2712 and 2720. States with influence are urged to apply the necessary pressure on the parties to implement these resolutions. We continue to support the diplomatic efforts of Egypt, Qatar, and United States as complementary to the efforts and clear demands of the Security Council. The resolution just adopted also demands the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, as well as ensuring humanitarian access to address their medical and other humanitarian needs, recalling that the taking of hostages is prohibited under international law. Mr. President, the resolution just adopted further demands the parties to the conflict to comply with their obligations under international law in relation to all persons they detain. This is reinforced by the reiteration of the Council's demand for the parties to comply with their obligation under international law, including international humanitarian law and human rights law, to protect all civilians, deploy attacks against civilians and civilian objects, violence and hostilities against civilians, and all acts of terrorism. Recognize that half of the population in the Gaza Strip are facing acute food shortages with the imminent risk of famine. The emphasis on the urgent need to expand the flow of humanitarian assistance to and reinforce the protection of civilians in the entire Gaza Strip is most significant. This demand is further reinforced by the reiteration of the further demand for the lifting of all barriers to the provision of humanitarian assistance at scale. The focus on the humanitarian needs of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip is aimed at restoring their human dignity. In a similar way, the resolution recognizes the dignity of the hostages and the detainees. Mr. President, Sierra Leone abstained on the vote on the oral amendment proposed by the Russian Federation, even though noting the explanation by the Russian Federation, but compelled to ensure that the objective of demanding an immediate ceasefire is met. The conflict impacts both Israel and Palestinian civilians. Therefore, the demand for an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan must lead to a lasting, sustainable ceasefire. It must lead to a permanent cessation of hostilities, and for Israel and Palestine to live side by side in peace, security, and stability. The ceasefire must lead towards the path of a two-state solution. We will continue in our resolve and support for the two-state solution, the only viable pathway to end the occupation and resolve this prolonged conflict. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
President, I'd like to start by offering the UK's sincere condolences for the terrorist attack at the Crocus City Hall near Moscow. Our deepest sympathy goes to the families of the many victims. President, the United Kingdom has long been calling for an immediate humanitarian pause leading to a sustainable ceasefire without a return to destruction, fighting, and loss of life as the fastest way to get hostages out and aid in. That is what this resolution calls for and why the United Kingdom voted yes on this text. President, Israel continues to reckon with the brutal horror of the October 7 attacks, and innocent hostages continued to be held by Hamas in Gaza. Israel has a right to defend itself and ensure such an attack can never happen again. We regret that this resolution has not condemned the terrorist attacks perpetrated by Hamas on the 7th of October. The UK condemns these attacks unequivocally. This resolution sets out the urgent demand for the unconditional release of all hostages, and we welcome the ongoing diplomatic efforts by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States to this end. The intense suffering of innocent Palestinian civilians in Gaza shows no sign of abating, and a humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding before our eyes. The resolution sends a clear and united message on the need for international humanitarian law to be upheld and for aid to be scaled up urgently, including the lifting of all barriers impeding its delivery. President, the UK Foreign Secretary and Prime Minister have reiterated these messages in our contacts with Prime Minister Netanyahu and other senior Israeli political leaders in recent weeks. We call for this resolution to be implemented immediately. President, we need to focus on how we chart the way from an immediate humanitarian pause to a lasting, sustainable peace without a return to fighting. That means the formation of a new Palestinian government for the West Bank and Gaza, accompanied by an international support package. Removing Hamas' capacity to launch attacks against Israel. Hamas no longer being in charge of Gaza. And a political horizon which provides a credible and irreversible pathway towards a two-state solution of Israel and Palestine living side by side in security and peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Господин председатель,
Mr. President,
уважаемые коллеги,
distinguished colleagues,
Россия проголосовала
Russia
за
voted in favor of the draft resolution
подготовленный десятками
prepared by
постоянных членов
the
Совета
10
Безопасности.
non-permanent members of the Security Council.
Принципиально важно, что
It is of
СБ
fundamental
ООН
importance that the
впервые
UN Security
требует
Council
от
for the first
сторон
time is demanding the
соблюдения
parties
немедленного
the
прекращения
observance of an
огня
immediate
пусть и
ceasefire,
ограниченного месяца
even
Рамадан.
if it is limited to the month of Ramadan.
К сожалению, то, что
Unfortunately,
случится после его
what
окончания,
happens after that ends
пока остается неясным,
remains unclear,
поскольку формулировка «lasting»
since the word lasting
может интерпретироваться
could
по-разному.
be interpreted in various different ways,
И это весьма показательно.
and that is very telling.
То есть те, кто покрывает Израиль,
Those who
хотят
are providing
по-прежнему
cover for
оставить ему
Israel still
свободу.
want to give it a free hand.
Очень хочется верить, что
We very
эта
much want to
формулировка
believe
будет
that this
использована в
wording will be
интересах мира,
used in the interests
а
of
не
peace
продвижение
rather than
бесчеловечной операции
advancing the
Израиля
inhumane
против
Israeli
палестинцев.
operation against the Palestinians.
Формулировка permanent
The wording
была бы более
permanent
точной.
would be more
И
precise,
мы разочарованы,
and
что
we are
она
disappointed
не прошла.
that it did not make it through.
Но все равно
But
считаем для себя
nevertheless,
принципиально
we
важным
believe it is
проголосовать за.
fundamentally important to vote in favor of peace.
Тем не менее, Совет
Nevertheless,
должен
the
продолжить
Council must
работать
continue to
над
work
достижением
on
постоянного
achieving
прекращения
a
огня.
permanent ceasefire.
Отмечаем и содержащиеся в
We also
резолюции
note
требования
what is contained in the
немедленного
resolution, the
и
demand
безусловного
for an
освобождения заложников.
immediate and unconditional release of the hostages.
22 марта в истории
On the
Совета
22nd of March,
Безопасности была очередная
there was
крайне
another
печальная
very
страница,
tragic day in the history of the
когда
Security
его
Council,
интригами и
when through
шантажом
intrigues
пытались
and
толкнуть по ложному
blackmail,
пути и
they
вынудить принять
tried to
документ,
put
который
us
не
on the
только
wrong
не
path
содержал
and to
прямого
coerce us to
требования
adopt a
или хотя
document
бы
that not
призыва
only
к
didn't contain
прекращению
a
огня,
demand or at least a call for a
но
ceasefire,
и фактически
but
выдавал, как в
essentially was
тот день
presented
выразился постоянный
as
представитель
the
Алжира,
permanent representative of Algeria said on
лицензию на
that day, as a
дальнейшее
license
убийство
for the
палестинцев.
further killing of Palestinians.
Этого ни мы, ни наши алжирские и китайские
Neither we
коллеги
nor our
допустить не
Algerian
можем.
and Chinese colleagues could allow that. From the first day of the escalation in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict zone, the Russian delegation has been calling upon members of the Security Council to respond to the unprecedented upsurge in violence with precise and an unambiguous demand for an immediate, permanent ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, in so doing fulfilling its mandate for the maintenance of international peace and security. Today, during the vote on our amendment, we once again saw the true face of our colleagues on the Security Council, and we realized who truly wants to end rather than suspend the inhumane Israeli operation. We would like to point out the following. What took place today is a response to those who criticized the veto power of the permanent members of the Security Council, because if we hadn't used it, if Russia and China hadn't used it on the 22nd of March, instead of a short text that could end the violence in the Gaza Strip, we could have ended up with a very harmful text in the US resolution that not only didn't demand a ceasefire, but also essentially would have given Israel a license to continue its actions against the Palestinians, including in Rafah. In conclusion, I would like to remind the representative of the United States, who time and again accuses the Council of not being able to condemn attacks on Israel and Russia of not being able to condemn the 7th of October terrorist attack. On the 18th of October, the US delegation had an opportunity to adopt the Brazilian draft resolution with a clear condemnation of the 7th of October and with a humanitarian pause. And yet, in that wording that we presented to Washington, that was insisted upon by Washington. I remind you that at that time, the delegation of Russia, when voting on the resolution, abstained, but the United States vetoed the Brazilian text. Therefore, you should only accuse yourselves. We must not return to this moment endlessly. Since the 6 months that have taken place since the 7th of October, the Hamas actions that have repeatedly been condemned by all members of the Security Council in their national capacity, Israel responded with inhumane crimes and the collective punishment of the Palestinian people, as a result of which more than 32,000 entirely innocent citizens have died, the majority of whom are women and children. Just think about those numbers. I would also like to remind you that immediately and unambiguously Russia condemned what took place on the 7th of October, and there's no need to continue speculating on that subject. We know firsthand what international terrorism is. Unfortunately, we faced a monstrous manifestation of it. Its brutal face of terrorism once again. The 22nd of March terrorist attack committed on the territory of our country took at least 143 entirely innocent lives, the very least of 143 entirely innocent civilians who were shot in cold blood, and we have faced such manifestations of terrorism also in the 90s, and we suffered heavy losses as a result. We are grateful to all of those who today expressed their condolences. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as a representative of Japan. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is catastrophic, even during the holy month of Ramadan, with high levels of food insecurity, imminence of famine, and nearly 1.5 million people sheltering in Rafah, struggling each day for their survival. We deeply mourn the tens of thousands of lives lost in the conflict, starting from October 7th terrorist attack and thereafter on the ground. In this vein, it is absolutely essential for the Security Council to demand an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan, respected by all parties, leading to lasting, sustainable ceasefire in Gaza. We, all Council members, also need to demand the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, as well as ensuring humanitarian access to address their medical and other humanitarian needs. This is why Japan, as one of the co-pen holders, has tabled the draft resolution. We welcome the Council was able to pass a resolution proposed by the E10 today. In addition, we strongly support the ongoing diplomatic efforts, in particular the four-party talks towards a ceasefire in connection with the release of all remaining hostages. We believe that ceasefire could pave the path towards sustainable peace and stability in the region, which is what the international community voices to us every day. Japan will continue to work at the Council to achieve that path. I thank you. I resume function as the President of the Council. I now give the floor to the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine.
Mr. President, I wish to begin my statement by conveying deepest condolences to the government, people, and my good friend Vasily. Our condolences of the Russian Federation following the horrific terrorist attack in Moscow. We express our sympathy to the bereaved families and stand in solidarity with our Russian brothers and sisters in these difficult days. Mr. President, it has taken 6 months, over 100,000 Palestinians killed and maimed, 2 million displaced, and famine for this Council to finally demand an immediate ceasefire. A vote for humanity to prevail, for life to prevail. The Palestinians in Gaza pleaded and appealed, shouted, cried, cursed, prayed, defied the odds to survive time and time again, and yet continue to face death, destruction and displacement, deprivation and disease, and an occupation-made famine. They are bombed, besieged, buried under the rubble of the houses they had built. They are killed in their homes, in the streets, in hospitals, in ambulances, in UN shelters, and even in tents. Their ordeal must come to an end and must come to an immediate end now. As we speak, families prepare to break their fast, missing loved ones around the table, and they will find nothing to put on their children's plate. In fact, there is no home sheltering them. There is no table to gather around, and no plates to fill and no food to eat. They lost their homes. They lost loved ones, some of them still trapped under the rubble. Imagine being a parent with kids under the rubble and others alive, feeling broken, but forced to go on for those who remained. Yesterday, Palestinian Christians celebrated Palm Sunday in besieged and destroyed churches that have become shelters in Gaza. They gathered, surrounded by death and praying for resurrection. Palestinian families cannot mourn or heal. They have to find a way to survive and help what is left of their family survive. Mr. President, when such atrocities are being committed in broad daylight against defenseless civilians, including women and children, the right thing to do The only thing to do morally, legally, politically is to put an end to it. There can be no justification for war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide. Accepting any justification for such crimes is renouncing our humanity and destroying the rule of international law beyond repair. Mr. President, 2 months ago, the highest international court, the ICJ, determined there was a real and imminent risk of irreparable prejudice to the plausible rights of Palestinians under the Genocide Convention. It ordered Israel to undertake immediate measures in relation to its mass and indiscriminate killing of Palestinians, to depriving Palestinians of the essential goods for their survival, to the incitement to genocide. Instead of implementing this mandatory order by the court, Israel has doubled down in the commission of its crimes. Your leaders have said in no uncertain terms that Israel is responsible for the famine underway in Gaza and has used starvation as a method of war. They have called on Israel not to use humanitarian aid as a bargaining chip. They spoke of a man-made disaster, meaning an Israeli occupation-made disaster. They have called repeatedly on Israel to stop its indiscriminate bombing and to spare civilian life to no avail. They have called repeatedly on Israel to give civilians safe haven. Instead, it attacked them even in hospital and UN shelters. It attacked them in the very places it asked them to heed to. It killed them if they stayed and killed them if they left. And now it continues to threaten a ground operation in Rafah, where it has pushed them and confined them at the very edge of the Gaza Strip in yet another attempt to forcibly displace our people. Instead of heeding these calls, Israel has attacked those making them. It continues, in particular, its incitement against the UN, its Secretary General, whom we salute him from this place, its agencies, notably UNRWA, the lifeline for Palestinians in Gaza. The Israeli Foreign Minister wrote that UNRWA cooperates with terrorists and that the UN has become, under the leadership of Antonio Guterres, and I quote, an anti-Semitic and anti-Israeli body that shelters and emboldens terror. Defend the Secretary General and the UN. This outrageous incitement has real-life consequences for UN and humanitarian staff on the ground who are targets of attacks, who are killed, arrested, and tortured, who are humiliated and harassed. It has also real-life consequences for Palestinians, as Israel has used it as a pretext to block humanitarian aid to be distributed by UNRWA. It is time for all these Israeli actions to trigger a serious international reaction, one that enforces consequences for these crimes rather than just make pleas that Israel continues to dismiss. There is no humanity when our lives are treated as expendable. There are no rules without enforcement. And Israel has been treated as a state above the law for so long that it feels it no longer has to hide when acting as an outlaw state. From ethnic cleansing to genocide. Our agony is caused by Israelis' actions, but also by the impunity it has been afforded, by the fact countries have not taken decisive measures to stop it, and many continue to call it and treat it as an ally even while it is committing such atrocities. Mr. President, we express our appreciation to the E10, all of you, for having put forward this resolution, and we welcome its adoption by the Council. We thank Algeria for representing us and all the Arab countries in this endeavor. We salute Arab unity in demanding immediate ceasefire and prevailed. This must be a turning point. This must lead to saving lives on the ground. This must signal the end of this assault of atrocities against our people. A nation is being murdered. A nation is being dispossessed. A nation is being displaced for decades now, but never at this scale since the Nakba. Never this openly, from Tantura to Gaza, from 1948 to 2024, we have endured. We have survived. We have resurrected only to face death once again. Life must prevail in Gaza. Must prevail in Gaza. Freedom must prevail in Palestine. For 6 months now, every single Palestinian in Gaza has endured untold suffering, loss, pain, and tragedy. This must stop now. Palestinian hostages, Palestinian victims are not less deserving of compassion and empathy, of outrage and solidarity. They must be freed from fear and want, from siege and occupation, from death and dispossession. Families must be reunited and start to heal, at least from the wounds that can actually be healed. They must be given the chance to bury their loved ones, to mourn their loss, to rebuild what can be. Even if the ceasefire happened now and the siege was lifted now, it would take generations to deal with the trauma and the devastation. Mr. President, now that this Council has finally called for a ceasefire, all forces should coalesce to make sure it is enforced. Apologies to those who the world has failed, to those that could have been saved and were not. Save the lives of those who survived against all odds. Tell them help is on the way. Hold accountable those who inflicted such suffering upon them. End this injustice. End it now. All of this is long overdue. And I thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, at the outset, I want to express my deepest condolences to the Russian people and to the families of all the victims of the heinous terror attack on Friday. Terror must always be condemned in the harshest terms. The Security Council was justifiably quick, very quick, to condemn Friday's terror attack in Russia, just as it was waited no time to condemn the terror attack in Iran against a police station back in December. Yet still, to this day, the Council refuses to condemn the most widespread and barbaric massacre suffered by the Jewish people since the Holocaust. At least 137 people were murdered at Crocus City Concert Hall in Russia on Friday by radical jihadists. And yes, almost 6 months ago, nearly 400 people were murdered at the Nova Music Festival in Israel by the radical jihadists of Hamas. Why does the Security Council discriminate between Russians murdered at a concert and Israelis murdered at a music festival? Civilians, dear colleagues, no matter where they live, deserve to enjoy music in safety and security. And the Security Council should have the moral clarity to condemn such acts of terror equally, without discrimination. Sadly, today as well, this Council refused to condemn the October 7th massacre. This is a disgrace. Colleagues, it was the Hamas massacre that started this war. I repeat, it was the Hamas massacre that started this war. Nearly 6 months have passed, and the Security Council still has not condemned the child-murdering rapists that began this war. The resolution just voted upon makes it seem as if the war started by itself. Well, let me set the record straight. Israel did not start this war, nor did Israel want this war. Israel disengaged and withdrew from Gaza 18 years ago. We wanted a ceasefire and coexistence. You can repeat here slogans and purport to know for the Palestinians what the Palestinians seek, but this won't make it the truth or the reality. The Palestinian representative here is lying through his teeth when he says that his people want to live side by side with Israel. By the way, as you probably know, he does not represent Hamas, he does not represent the Gazans. They did not choose him to speak for them. His leader, President Abbas, refuses to even condemn the massacre, and he continued to pay terrorists. After Israel withdrew from Gaza, the Palestinians elected Hamas, a terrorist organization. They elected a terror organization. Hamas converted every inch of Gaza into a terror war machine, right under the UN's nose, maybe with the help of some of the UN's agencies like UNRWA. And Hamas initiated ceaseless attacks on Israeli civilians throughout the past 18 years. Thousands and thousands of indiscriminate rockets and missiles at civilians. Today, Hamas is the most popular movement among Palestinians. And according to every poll, the vast majority of Palestinians support Hamas's massacre on October 7th, not only in Gaza, also in Judea and Samaria. This is the reality you should face and you should address. Colleagues, while the resolution fails to condemn Hamas, it does state something that should have been the driving moral force. This resolution denounces the taking of hostages, recalling that it is in violation of international law. Taking innocent civilian hostage is a war crime, and there is no arguing that this is what Hamas has committed. The release of the hostages should have been the #1 priority. When it comes to bringing the hostages home, the Security Council must not settle for words alone, but take action, real action. It is unfathomable that when it comes to releasing the hostages, we still only see inaction. Not a single step has been taken by the Council, aside from symbolic words. Yet, when it comes to the situation in Gaza, the Council rushed to take action. You appointed a special coordinator and established a monitoring mechanism. The Council visited Rafah to see the aid shipments firsthand, and the Secretary General has already visited Rafah crossing twice. Why do our hostages not receive concrete action? What have you done to advance their release? Colleagues, following this Council's adoption of UNSCR 2712 and 2720, which both called for the release of all hostages, Hamas did not stop to even contemplate for even one moment. It should be very clear that as long as Hamas refuses to release the hostages in the diplomatic channels, there is no other way to secure their return other than through a military operation. So on the one hand, the resolution says that taking civilian hostages is in violation of international law, yet, on the other hand, despite the fact that you know Hamas won't listen to your calls and release the hostages, you demand a ceasefire. Take a moment and think about this moral contradiction. Your demand for a ceasefire, without conditioning it on the release of the hostages, not only is not helpful, but it undermines the efforts to secure their release. It is harmful to these efforts because it gives Hamas terrorists the hope to get a ceasefire without releasing the hostages. All members of the Council, all members should have voted against this shameful resolution. Mr. President, where are these Council's actions? Why don't you designate Hamas as a terror organization? Even if there are Council members here who would prevent this due to their political alliances with Hamas leadership, where are the moral efforts to advance such a designation? I wish to suggest an alternative text that should have been adopted by the Council if it wasn't so biased against Israel. The Security Council strongly condemns and deplores all abuses of human rights and, where applicable, violations of international humanitarian law by the terrorist group, including those involving violence against civilian populations, notably women and children, kidnapping, killing, hostage-taking, pillaging, rape, sexual slavery, and other sexual violence, recruitment of children, and destruction of civilian property. The Security Council demands that the terrorist group immediately and unequivocally cease all hostilities and all abuses of human rights and violations of international humanitarian law and disarm and demobilize. The Security Council demands the immediate and unconditional release of all those abducted who remain in captivity. The Security Council recognizes that some of such acts may amount to crimes against humanity. Well, colleagues, I did not draft this text. You know who did? This Council. This is the resolution adopted by the Council 10 years ago when Boko Haram kidnapped the schoolgirls in Nigeria. So I ask you again, why can this Council call on Boko Haram to lay down their arms, but the same cannot be demanded of the murderous Hamas terrorists? Is the life of little baby Kfir Bibas worth less than the life of a Nigerian child? Sadly, it's for the same reason why you can condemn terror attacks in Russia and Iran, but not in Israel. To this Council, Israeli blood is cheap. This is a travesty, and I'm disgusted. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Israel for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Yemen.
Thank you, Mr. President.
It
is my honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the Arab Group. At the outset, I would like to congratulate you and congratulate Japan on presiding over the Council for this month. I also thank you for holding this session. We would also like to express our condolences to our colleague Vasily and to the Russian delegation, as well as the Russian government and people, for the terrorist act that claimed the lives of dozens of victims. We condemn this terrorist act and we condemn terrorism in all its forms. The Arab Group would like to thank the E10 for tabling this concise and humanitarian draft resolution that was adopted by the Security Council. This resolution unequivocally and expressly calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza during the holy month of Ramadan, leading to a permanent and sustainable ceasefire. Given the urgency of this call from the Arab Group and the international community as a whole, especially in light of the dangerous and catastrophic deterioration of the humanitarian situation in Gaza, which can no longer be accepted or tolerated. The Arab Group would like to express its thanks and appreciation to all the members of the Security Council that engaged in a positive manner in the negotiations on this draft resolution, and we value the position of member states that voted in favor of this urgent humanitarian resolution. We also welcome the adoption of Resolution 2728, which gives priority to the humanitarian dimension in order to save the lives of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, to make sure that the Security Council once again is shouldering its legal and moral responsibilities in maintaining international peace and security and to end the bloodbath in Gaza. The Arab Group also reaffirms that we should consider this resolution as a first step leading to another binding resolution that stipulates the immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip in order to compel Israel to immediately and without any preconditions cease the war it has launched against the Gaza Strip. We also reaffirm that the efforts to reach an agreement on the exchange of prisoners and detainees and the ratification of a truce, this does not run counter to the call for an immediate ceasefire, as this call would contribute to facilitating and enhancing these efforts. Mr. President, this Council has been the hostage of political calculations and narrow interests that disregard the humanitarian and legal right to save lives, stem the bloodshed, and deliver urgent assistance to those in need without any obstacles. This lies at the heart of the responsibilities and functions of this Council. Adopting today's resolution comes as a response, albeit late, to the Palestinian victims and the calls of the international community for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. We do hope that you will continue to work seriously and not just focus on a temporary ceasefire, but to work on reaching a comprehensive and final ceasefire to allow the delivery of all humanitarian assistance to Gaza without obstacles, to put an end to the crime of forceful displacement of Palestinians that seeks to uproot them from their lands. This resolution reaffirms that the Israeli occupation forces do not have free rein in perpetrating daily massacres against children and women, in preventing the delivery of humanitarian assistance, and in forcibly displacing Palestinians. The Arab Group calls for an immediate compliance with today's resolution, and we warn against the consequences of moving forward with the occupation's plans to launch a ground offensive against the city of Rafah, which is the last safe haven for over 1.5 million Palestinian displaced persons. This will cause an unacceptable humanitarian catastrophe. Furthermore, the Arab Group renews its position that rejects the policy of bias, cover-up, and protection for the plans of the Israeli occupation authorities at the expense of over 32,000 people who died and over 72,000 people who were injured, mostly women and children, in the Gaza Strip over the past 5 months of this brutal Israeli aggression. The Arab Group categorically rejects the double standards that is prolonging this conflict in light of the complete failure to implement any resolutions on Palestine over the past 75 years. We also call once again for the complete implementation of all relevant Security Council resolutions, including resolutions 2712 and 2720 of 2023. Mr. President, the Israeli occupation forces continue with their crimes and their aggression and genocidal war against civilians in the Gaza Strip since the 7th of October. They are targeting women and children. They've even added fuel to the fire by adopting the policy of starvation against the Palestinian people to add to Israel's crimes against humanity and its blatant violations. Therefore, the Arab Group calls on this Council to hold Israel accountable for its crimes and to impose strict sanctions on settlers in the occupied Palestinian territory, including in Jerusalem, those who are perpetrating acts of violence against the Palestinian people or those who are inciting violence. The Israeli occupation should also bear the consequences of this brutal aggression and the brutal massacres against the residents of Gaza. They should bear the responsibility of rebuilding what their monstrous military machine has destroyed. They should pay reparations to all victims that died as a result of this aggression. In conclusion, Mr. President, the Arab Group reaffirms that it will continue with its efforts at all levels and in all fora to make sure that this Council shoulders its responsibility to make sure that the provisions of this resolution are implemented, provisions on an immediate ceasefire, on the delivery of humanitarian assistance without obstacles, to put an end to the policy of forcible displacement of the Palestinian people, and to provide international protection to Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory, and to hold Israel, the occupying power, accountable for all its crimes against the Palestinian people. The Arab Group also calls on all countries and international organizations to recognize without delay an independent Palestinian state along the lines of June 4, 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital, and to accept Palestine as a full member state of the United Nations and its entities in order to end the suffering of this people and to restore some of their inalienable rights that they have been denied over the past decades, so that Palestinians can live in their independent states that is recognized internationally, that is a full member of the United Nations, similar to other countries around the world. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Yemen for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of the speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
think we need
Finally. Finally.
We need that more. Everyone, we need everyone. No, we need more. We need the President.
Yes, yes.
President.
Where is the president?
Where's Caroline?
Jose, run away.
Amar.
We need Amar, we need Caroline. Amar, Caroline.
Press take out now.
Oh, Jose, yeah. Amar.
Namar, I think is.
Amar. We need Amar.
Hmm?
Oh, a nice number. You should play Lotto.
I wanted to mention all the.
We are good.
You are good?
Yes, don't worry.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I would like to make a statement on behalf of the elected members of the Security Council who are Algeria, Ecuador, Guyana, Japan, Malta, Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, Slovenia, Switzerland, and my own country, Mozambique. It is a historical day for the Council. For the first time ever, we sponsored and the Council adopted the resolution on the question of Palestine. We are happy that the Council has successfully adopted the much needed resolution to demand the immediate ceasefire in Gaza and the release of hostages. It also demands that the parties comply with their obligations under international law in relation to all persons that they detain. It is our hope, it is the hope of the E10 that the resolution adopted today will be implemented in good faith by all parties and will help ease the suffering of the population in Gaza. Humanitarian aid must flow immediately and without delay. We also hope that this resolution will pave the way for more positive perspectives towards a lasting peace in the Middle East. Finally, we would like to hail the determination, unity, cohesion, and commitment of all members of the E10 group in tabling the text and conducting an inclusive and transparent discussions throughout the process that, with the cooperation of the permanent members, has led us today to achieve this important goal. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. In her remarks, thank you very much, Ambassador. Nadia Situma from Al Jazeera English. In her remarks to the Security Council following the adoption of the ceasefire, Ambassador of the United States, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, mentioned that this is a non-binding resolution. What is your reaction to those comments?
I will invite other colleagues to respond.
I can respond to that.
Yeah.
We have a
Under the Charter, all Security Council resolutions are binding, and every member states are under the obligation to implement those resolutions. But I still invite the
maybe legally speaking, it's non-binding because in accordance with the UN Charter, all Security Council decisions must be implemented and legally binding, but this resolution did not use the word decide. And it did not invoke Chapter 7 of the Charter, so legally speaking, it may not be legally binding, but morally, I mean, as I said in my statement, this reflects the consensus of the international community, so it should be implemented.
All United Nations Security Council resolutions are binding and mandatory. I have been a member of the International Law Commission for 15 years and president, and I know what I'm saying.
Thank you,
okay?
If I could add, firstly, just to say that it's an important day for ETN unity. And so the question about the binding nature of the resolution is a legal one. And following the view of the Permanent Representative of Mozambique, who was a member and chair of the ILC, being a legal practitioner myself and being part of the 6th Committee for over 5 years, I will say it is binding. And it's not just my words, it's also the words of the International Court of Justice in the advisory opinion 1971, advisory opinion given by the ICJ. So I think it should be clear to everyone that this resolution is binding on the parties. Thank you.
Can I follow up on comments about Chapter 7 and how if it's not a Chapter 7 resolution, it's not legally binding, as the ambassador from the Republic of Korea has mentioned?
I think you had the answer already.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. But I invite you to have some international law with me.
خليه يجي الجزائري. هلا اعزموا اللي بده يجي معنا. اهلا وسهلا. عمار تعال هون. هون هون. هون 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 عمار هون. جنبي جنبي جنبي. وين الرئيس؟ تعال.
Thank you very much for being with us. It is a historic day today, where for the first time after almost 6 months, the Security Council adopted a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire. And we in the Arab group, from the first day of this aggression, were united around 3 objectives. The first objective was an immediate ceasefire to stop the aggression against our people. Today is a significant step in that direction. The second objective was to have humanitarian assistance up to the need of our people in the Gaza Strip. I believe the ceasefire will open the door for the implementation of that second objective. And the third objective was not to allow the crime against humanity from forcefully transferring our people outside the Gaza Strip, although they have been internally forced to move from the north to the center, to the south, and then to other places in the Gaza Strip. A ceasefire, immediate ceasefire, would allow our people to return to the places where they were displaced from. So I am proud of the unity of the Arab group. I am proud that our representative in the Security Council is Algeria, working closely with us, reflecting the demands of the Arab group, and I think today we prevailed. Those who say that the Security Council is not enforceable or not mandatory, give us a break. We go to the General Assembly, they say it is not enforced or binding. We come to the Security Council, they tell us it's not binding. We do not buy that. Security Council resolutions are binding. And if Israel is not going to implement it, then it is the duty of the Security Council to use Chapter 7 to take measures and punitive measures in order to make them obey the resolution of the Security Council. We are not done. We salute our people in Gaza and in all of Palestine. All of our people, all of their leaders, we are one as Palestinians. We survived this ordeal. We will rebuild Gaza. We are very proud and resilient people. And thank you for covering our story during these 5.5 months, and we are not done. We will go back to the Security Council tomorrow. We will ask them to defend the brave Secretary General who is with us today in refugee camps of the Palestinians in Jordan. He is the one who went to Rafah twice. He is the one who met with the leaders of Egypt, of Jordan, of Palestine, of all the Arabs, calling for a humanitarian ceasefire from early after the aggression. And he today called from Jordan, implement the Security Council resolution that was adopted just a few minutes ago. We salute him. We will defend him. We will defend the agencies of the United Nations, and we will ask the Security Council tomorrow to issue a statement or a position defending the Secretary General and the UN agencies. And we will not be done. We will continue the march, and we will start working on a draft resolution to make sure that Rafah will not be invaded. Rafah should be protected. We should not create a horrific humanitarian situation or crimes in Rafah to push our people outside Rafah in the direction of Egypt. So we are not done. We will continue working. The unity of the Arab group is playing a tremendous role in the unity in the Security Council, especially among the 10, and we will continue working and we will keep you informed. Talal, you are first, number one.
Thank you so much. What's your comment on what the American ambassador, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, said, that any release, any ceasefire must be accompanied by the release of all, unconditional release of all hostages, knowing very well by many, and they argue, that if all hostages were released, there's nothing to stop Israel from going the whole way.
Well, Israel has to abide by its obligation under Charter, and it has to immediately stop the fighting. This is what the resolution called, immediate ceasefire. Any member can interpret as they wish, but the law is the law. The language of the resolution is crystal clear, an immediate ceasefire. Therefore, an immediate ceasefire has to be put in place.
Also calls for unconditional, immediate release of hostages. Now, there are many people in the Middle East say, what guarantees are, once the hostages, all hostages are released, what guarantees do we have that Israel will not go the whole way to Rafah, more destructions? What stops Israel from doing that?
I understand the frustration of our people, and they have the right to be frustrated from the international community that dragged its feet for 5.5 months before they agreed to a ceasefire. But the language of the resolution is crystal clear. Operative paragraph 1 starts from demanding an immediate ceasefire. The second part of the sentence, it is not conditional upon the first part. It says, and also it calls for the other part. The other part was reflected in all the resolutions in the Security Council, adopted in the Security Council, and the resolutions adopted in the 10th emergency session twice in the General Assembly. All of us are saying immediate ceasefire, and in fact, our brothers and sisters, Egypt, Qatar, are negotiating with the United States and others, and negotiating and mediating with our brothers, Hamas, the release of the hostages and exchange of prisoners. So that principle is not being rejected by all of us, provided that there is a release of the Palestinian detainees, especially those who are serving life sentence. And I think that that will happen, and we hope that it happens very soon. And we are behind Egypt and Qatar, who are playing a very important role in the mediation and the negotiation in order to have a deal. So that is not something that is rejected by the Arabs or by, those who are negotiating this agreement on that deal. You asked a lot of questions before, but if there's a woman before you that wants to ask a question, would have the right. I don't see anyone.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador.
You're the last one.
Thank you. Anadi Satuma from Al Jazeera English. During the meeting, Prime Minister Netanyahu indicated that he was going to cancel a visit to D.C. in reaction to the Security Council adoption. What is your comment on the fact that it seems that negotiations on the ground for a deal are going in the opposite direction, not towards a deal, in reaction to this resolution?
I don't really know what the negotiation on the ground entails. I'm not involved in it. My job is to work at the UN, including the Security Council, to produce resolutions like the one that we produced. That is my job. Now, with regard to the relationship between Netanyahu and the current administration in Washington, D.C., we leave it up to them to respond to his, disrespectful way of behaving with the country that is responsible for the survival of Israel, and arming Israel, and giving it, ammunition, and giving it billions of dollars to continue the atrocities against our people. They have to stand up and respond to him. That is not my job to respond to that. It is their job. Thank you very much for being with us.
I understand that you go to the General Assembly and it's not binding, that you come here and it's not binding, but we just witnessed how two different ambassadors interpreted this resolution in two different ways.
I think that interpretation is among lawyers and legal experts over, this issue. There are differences of opinions, but the law is the law. The Charter demands from all member states to honor and respect and implement Security Council resolutions. And my brother Mahmoud is the legalist among us. But let me also add, just in case that a country rebel against Security Council resolution, it makes then sense that the Security Council that has tools available to them to resort to Chapter 7 to take measures in order to force that rebel country to comply with Security Council resolution. But my brother Mahmoud can respond.
Thank you. I mean, the ambassador has summed it perfectly. Article 25 of the Charter says clearly that the members of the United Nations shall carry out the decisions of the Security Council. The language used in OP1 is demand language. It's a binding language which is based on Article 25 of the Charter. As such, it is a mandatory resolution that has to be carried out. If you're talking about Chapter 7, when you use Chapter 7, it is for enforceable measure. If a country violates international law in a manner that threatens international peace and security, you can use force or impose sanctions. This is what Chapter 7 is about. So that's the difference.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you. نعم. الواحد
Good afternoon. I wanted to say that so the UK, including my Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary, have long called for an immediate humanitarian pause as the fastest way to get the hostages out and to get more aid into Gaza, leading to a sustainable ceasefire and progress towards long-term peace. That is what this resolution calls for, and it's why we voted in favour of it today. And we call on for the implementation of the resolution to be immediate. We regret that the resolution did not condemn the terrorist attacks perpetrated by Hamas on the 7th of October. We condemn these attacks unequivocally, and the Council should do so too. Palestinians in Gaza are living through a humanitarian catastrophe. The situation will not improve until more aid can get in, and my Prime Minister and my Foreign Secretary have been clear in their engagements with Israel that all barriers to aid delivery need to be lifted. We have not yet seen the improvements that we need to get more aid in. The Council's message today is an important one, and I reiterate, we call for it to be implemented immediately. Thank you.
There's been some discussion about whether this resolution is binding or non-binding. What does Britain think? And given that you've abstained on previous resolutions, you've now voted in favour. Does this signal any kind of British frustration with Israel?
So, in our view, this resolution needs to be implemented immediately. I said that in my explanation of vote. It sends a clear Council message, a united Council message, and we expect all Council resolutions to be implemented. This one is not any different, and the demands in the resolution are absolutely clear. The humanitarian pause leading to a sustainable ceasefire, the release of the hostages, international humanitarian law and humanitarian aid in. And on the second part of your question, this resolution is completely consistent with my Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary's position. You know, as I said, they've been calling for a long time for a humanitarian pause as a way to get hostages out and aid in, leading to a sustainable ceasefire and then a long-term solution. And we see this resolution as a very important step on that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Israel has indicated that they will no longer be letting aid convoys to the north of Gaza. Do you have any reaction to that?
So, as I said, one important part of this resolution is that we call for humanitarian aid for all of the barriers that are impeding humanitarian aid access to be lifted. And again, my Foreign Secretary and my Prime Minister have been unequivocal and robust with the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and senior Israelis that those barriers need to be lifted. Thank you.